right, so we're starting the book of Exodus today. And I just wanted to read through verses 1 through 22 of chapter 1, because that's where a lot of the message is coming from. But it says, "Now these are the names of Bnei Israel who came into Egypt with Jacob, each man with his family, Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah, Issachar, Zebulun and Benjamin, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, and Asher. The souls that came out of the line of Jacob numbered 70 in all, while Joseph was already in Egypt. Then Joseph died, as did all his brothers, and all that generation. Yet Bnei Israel were fruitful, increased abundantly, multiplied, and grew extremely numerous. So the land was filled with them. Now there arose a new king over Egypt who did not know Joseph. He said to his people, 'Look, the people of Bnei Israel are too numerous and too powerful for us. Come, we must deal shrewdly with them, or else they will grow even more numerous, so that if war breaks out, they may join our enemies, fight against us, and then escape from the land.' So they set slave masters over them to afflict them with forced labor, and they built Pithom and Ramses as storage cities for Pharaoh. But the more they afflicted them, the more they multiplied, and the more they spread. So the Egyptians dreaded the presence of Bnei Israel. And they worked them harshly and made their lives bitter with hard labor, with mortar and brick, doing all sorts of work in the fields. In all their labors they worked them with cruelty. Moreover, the king of Egypt spoke to the Hebrew midwives, one of whom was named Shiphrah and the other Puah, and said, 'When you help the Hebrew women during the childbirth, look at the sex. If it is a son, then kill him, but if it's a daughter, she may live.' Yet the midwives feared God, so they did not do as the king of Egypt commanded them, but let the boys live. So the king of Egypt summoned the midwives and said to them, 'Why have you done this, and let the boys live?' The midwives told Pharaoh, 'Because the Hebrew women are not like Egyptian women. They are like the animals, lively or vigorous. They give birth before the midwife comes to them.' So God was good to the midwives, and the people multiplied, growing very numerous. Because the midwives feared God, he gave them families of their own. But Pharaoh charged all his people, saying, 'You are to cast every son that is born into the river, but let every daughter live.'" So much of this is where it gets challenging. The sons of Israel, they were in and drawn down to Egypt by the plan and the purpose of God. And Egypt would save them eventually, initially. It started out as that place of refuge for them. Moving things around a little bit. So sometimes we're moved into places that start off real good. But the Israelites would prosper there for a season, right? It was for a while that everything was going well. Yet, as we see in verse 7, they were fruitful, they increased, abundantly multiplied, and grew extremely numerous, so that the land was filled with them. So have they gone beyond Goshen even? It sure seems like it, that they're making their presence felt all over the place. Not just in Goshen. And so it's during this time that they are spreading out, that things are going well, that Joseph and that whole generation died. And the problem that they were having then, and some of the problems that we even have now, is that generational knowledge and experience can be quickly lost or taken for granted. Are we seeing that more and more?
Yes.
I mean, that younger generations don't appreciate the things that the previous ones have gone through, what they have learned, how they've advanced, and they just take so much of it for granted and just kind of expect it to always be getting better, always be improving, without realizing how much it had to be fought for to attain it, or the work that had to be put into making things as good as they are. And I've been saying this for years, since we moved here to East Tennessee, that there's so much knowledge that people have of the mountains over there, of where the water sources are, where certain places are in the mountains, and the generation that grew up there and knows all of that stuff is dying off. And we're going to have to relearn a lot of that stuff eventually at some point, I'm afraid. It's going to be hard to find again. That knowledge, when it's lost, it's harder to get back than it is to find it the first time, in many instances. So they may be prospering, but this generational knowledge is getting lost and taken for granted. The victories, as well as the mistakes of the past, can be ignored, and then the lessons can be lost that you learn from those things. Because what's the phrase that we hear? Those who forget the past are doomed to repeat it. See, so you think about it, what have we forgotten in our current day, in our current generation? What mistakes are we poised to repeat? That's concerning, isn't it? Because we see some of the patterns and some of the cycles coming through. We see some of those things, and it is concerning about what are we going to do that we've watched other nations do and go through and see how bad it is for them, but oh no, we can do it better here. Right? We won't do that here. So here's the thing, a new king arose that did not know or care about the past. He did not know or recognize Joseph and the Hebrew people and the contributions that they made or the good things that they did. And this failure to recognize, to know Joseph, caused Pharaoh and the Egyptians, were they making, with that lack of knowledge, were they making good decisions or bad decisions? What do you think? Yeah, that lack of keeping and maintaining that knowledge was making them make very poor decisions in their present. And those poor decisions in their present was going to have consequences that extended into the future. Because they forgot their past, because they forgot about Joseph and the why they got there and who they were, their future was put into jeopardy. Pharaoh, we read about that, he was threatened by the Israelites. He said to the people, look, the people of Bnei Israel, the children of Israel, are too numerous and too powerful. Come, we must deal shrewdly with them, or else they will grow even more numerous. We've got to change how we deal with these people, so that if war breaks out, they may join our enemies, fight against us, and then escape from the land. So did they really want them to go? No. They just wanted them to be more manageable, more controllable. They didn't want them to be an enemy against them. So now they had forgotten the past so much that they almost like they assumed that the Israelites had always been there and were always supposed to stay there, because they didn't want them to escape.
Would you repeat what you said about poor decision?
Well, the fact that they had forgotten their past,
Yeah.
And forgotten about Joseph and all that, caused them to make very bad decisions in their present, which put into jeopardy their future. And that's a cycle that gets repeated all the time. And we're in some of those days where we are forgetting decisions and battles that were fought in the past, and we're going to fall into some of those. We're making bad decisions as a people, as a nation now, and that's going to cause some trouble for us down the line. Yes, McKett?
Bill Cloud always would talk about, one of the things that he thinks was they assimilated into, forgot who they were as a people, assimilated it, and much like the church today.
So the Israelites themselves were forgetting their own identity.
Like maybe they didn't stay in Goshen where they were separate and protected.
Right.
And assimilated, somewhat like the church. About every 30 years it catches up with the culture.
Right. So it's not just the king, it's not just the Egyptians who were forgetting about Joseph, it was the Israelites themselves.
Right.
That's a very good point. That's a very interesting point. But he is the one that, because of this fear and this concern, they set slave masters over them to afflict them with forced labor And they built those storage cities for Pharaoh. So they mistreated, they began to curse, essentially, God's people, which, what kind of warning did God give about that all the way back in Genesis chapter 12?
Those who curse.
Those who curse you will be cursed. Yeah. So it's that dynamic at work. That promise that was made all the way back in Genesis 12 is going to be, we're going to see this play out in Egypt. So Egypt began to deal shrewdly out of this fear that they would join with their enemies and change it. They would set these slave masters over them. Even though, if you remember when we were looking at the account with Joseph, it was the Israelites were the only ones who were not slaves by the end of the drought. Remember, the Egyptians sold everything they had. They sold their property, their land, their animals, their money. They lost everything, and eventually they sold themselves. But the only ones who seemed to be acquiring land and acquiring property at that time was the Israelites. So even though they were not slaves at the end of it, now they are being pushed into that kind of forced labor. So Egypt, is Egypt a place of refuge anymore?
No.
They overstayed their welcome. Kind of like family at this time of year, some of them stay a little too long. And so that's just their situation. They were no longer a place of refuge. You know, even in the Psalm, the 23rd Psalm, it says, He makes us lie down besides in green pastures, besides the still waters. We're not supposed to stay in those places forever, are we? No. But don't we want to? Don't you think He has to, you know, as a shepherd, you have to motivate the sheep to get out a little bit?
If you stayed there, you eat up all the vegetation, and
It would no longer be
it would
fit
no
for
longer
you.
support you.
Yeah,
It'll turn into a mud pit.
it will. It doesn't stay pretty forever if you just sit there and consume everything. But so they're not supposed to stay in this place of refuge forever. They're going to have to want to get out. And we even see that in modern day, people talking about the Jewish people returning to the land, returning back to Israel. You know, sometimes we're so comfortable where we are that we're like, well, what do I need to leave for? And sometimes he's going to have to motivate us to get us to be willing to leave.
Today, there are people in this country that want to get rid of us. Is that not true?
As believers, yes.
Well, not
Who hold to their faith.
even claim to. Okay?
Yeah.
But my point is, I have forgotten, maybe 10 years ago, the certain parties said, we don't need these people. We don't need these votes. We don't need these people. We need to have dominion over them. We need to be able to tell them what to do and how to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Even to the point of just, enslaving them of themselves. We got to the point of being comfortable that we're not going to say, no, you can't. Because if we don't, they are going to take over.
See, now you're getting ahead of me now.
Okay, socialism is going to be here in this country 10
Yep.
years from now with all these
Well,
other
they not
generations.
only want to silence us as believers, they want to silence
I'm
us
sorry.
as seniors.
I'm sorry, Kevin.
No, don't be sorry.
You know,
Silence as generational silence?
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because the people that fought against a lot of the stuff that is being advocated now, there are people who know better. It's like, guys, this is a terrible idea, but they don't want them speaking out. Yes.
Well, I just had a thought. Our country used to grow a lot of its food and do a lot of the stuff, and then they, what do you call it, they had technical, outsourced and improvements, like even in the grocery stores. So your average middle-class person who would work on a farm or work at the grocery store, whatever, they don't need them anymore. It's very interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yep, there's a lot of those things that we're at, and we're getting.
Selling ourselves, like,
We're going into that kind of debt. We are, in essence, in a lot of ways, selling ourselves in a lot of ways. But so Egypt was no longer this place of refuge, but it was this place of forging. Essentially, it was forging them into a people, into a nation. And despite the mistreatment that they were getting, how did the Israelites fare? Did they grow smaller or did they grow larger? So yeah. They worked them harshly and made their lives bitter with hard labor, mortar and brick, and all sorts of work in the fields. But in all their labors they worked them with cruelty. But the more they afflicted them, the more they multiplied. And the more they spread. So the Egyptians dreaded the presence of Bnei Israel. So,
I'm sorry, but that happens with believers too.
Yeah.
The church.
yes, it
when
does.
it's afflicted, it tends to multiply and grow.
Yeah.
Those in charge that think that we're going to put a stop to this and crack down on it end up making it worse for themselves. They end up growing the people of God because it weeds out those that don't take it seriously. And it leaves those who do believe, and they're going to believe even harder. They're going to believe even more.
And it sharpens the contrast.
It does. You're not able to just kind of blend in those kind of moments. So yeah, there's a sharpening of the contrast in all of that. So in the midst of this persecution, the people grew.
That's what the devil thought he could stamp out Christianity, but the
Oh, yeah.
more he tried to stamp it out, why the greater it grew.
On multiple occasions, they would try to stamp it out, and it ends up growing even more. But so when that's the case, even though they're inflicting all of this hardship and all of this forced labor and all this stuff, more drastic measures had to be taken. And we see that happening. You know, the women and the children were being targeted. Killing the newborns became the goal. Targeting boys and making them less of a threat became a goal. Well, that's what we see in verse 15. Moreover, the king of Egypt spoke to the Hebrew midwives. We just read about this a little ago. He says, when you help the Hebrew women during childbirth, look at the sex. If it's a son, then kill him. But if it's a daughter, she may live. Now, does this sound familiar, the targeting of women and children? Does that sound familiar?
Yeah.
Yeah, it does. That's what's been happening in our country in the last couple of generations. You know, you hear politically, you hear people talk about there's a war on women. You hear one party accusing the other of that all the time. There really is one. But it's not so much politically, especially from considering that side is the one that's waging it, primarily. There is a war on women. It's a war that demeans who and what God has made these women to be. You know, it's a war that encourages them to kill their own children and reject the life, the blessing that God places there. It's a war against that role of being a helpmate, of being a woman of God, of all the things that the scriptures uplift. Our culture is warring against and saying, no, that's not good enough. It's getting them to be consider those things a waste of their time and a waste of their life.
Well, it's the attack on the family.
And it's an attack on the family.
Because there's a major war on the men in our society,
Mm-hmm.
you know.
Well, with that, there's this war on children,
Yes.
right? Killing the male and the female, really, but a lot of times abortion is targeting female even more because the sex-selective abortion that's around in the world, they favor males being born. So women are getting killed off, and it's becoming a problem. But then there's the whole the war against our children that's trying to convince them that they need to switch from one side to the other. You're seeing that more and more. You know, where there's this confusion going on that's being encouraged, and if you don't feel normal, then you must be the other. You must be a female that really needs to be a male, or you must be a male that needs to be a female.
It's even worse than that with gender neutrality. You're
Yeah.
neither male
You're
or
nothing.
female. You're just
Again, it's attacking from within.
And
Because
so
you attack the woman herself.
some on the left would cringe at this. If you look at the sex and you see that it's a boy, well, now they're saying you can't identify a male or female just by their gender or by their physical traits. You have to wait till they get old enough to tell you what gender they want to be. That's the kind of confusion that is being encouraged. Yes?
What we really have here is a war on God.
And it's a rejection of everything that God has made. Absolutely. So, and then you consider young girls are being targeted for overly sexualizing them in the name of liberation. Young boys are targeted to downplay, and consider toxic masculinity. You all heard those terms before as something destructive. It's no wonder that our children are confused and not walking in the ways of God, because we, as the body of Christ, as the people of God, are kind of going along with it. A large portion of us are. Whole generations have been brought up essentially to forget about Joseph. The people of God and the ways of God, they've been brought up to ridicule God's people, both Christians and Jews, to ridicule the Bible and its lifestyle, to not want anything to do with the faith of their fathers. And so is it any wonder, they are in forgetting the past and forgetting the faith, is it any wonder that there's an increasing hostility towards the people of God? And if history sets this pattern, as more and more people forget about Joseph, forget who he is this hostility, is it going to decrease or increase?
Increase.
It's going to increase. All right? As lawlessness increases, what happens? The love of many grows cold. That's what Yeshua promised. That's what he said. In reality, it all started a long time ago. This is not new to this generation. This has been a battle that has been ongoing for centuries, for thousands of years. But it's even we are living with bad decisions from our history that is still bearing bad fruit. That bring persecution to God's people, that bring curses upon us. You look in early church history, there was leadership that arose pretty quickly that did not know or recognize Joseph. They did not recognize the Jewish people who were living among them, did not know their heritage, did not know their beliefs. And so the church then began to reject God's people and God's ways, teaching things, that God has rejected the Jewish people, that they are now cursed and replaced, that the ways of the Old Testament, the ways of the Torah are no longer for us, but have all been done away. We've all had to fight these kind of battles before. Decisions were made to purposely forget Joseph. It wasn't even done accidentally. It was done intentionally. And so you see the early church beginning to deal shrewdly and treacherously with them. Right? Becoming more and more violent and oppressive. And this, pops up throughout church history, making, things like making the Sabbath illegal, the feasts and things like that. Divorcing Passover from the crucifixion, first fruits from the resurrection, even being friends with Jewish people illegal. And then that leads to things like inquisitions, expulsions. That happens a lot, doesn't it? We see it happen over and over again. Leading up to men even like Martin Luther, who in trying to make corrections to the church's theology, ends up hardening his heart towards the Jewish people, where he would be willing to write a book called On the Jews and Their Lies, which motivated who? That was used as a foundation to motivate Hitler. A church reformer became the foundation of the Holocaust.
The what now?
A church reformer, Martin Luther, became a foundation or a motivation for the Holocaust. So forgetting Joseph has been, written into our history with various degrees and times of overt hostility and persecution. And you consider where we are now. In modern day churches we need to choose whether we're going to continue in that pattern of forgetting about Joseph or whether we're going to remember Joseph. Whether we're going to continue in the same mistakes or whether we're going to start trying to make corrections.
Or is it too late to make corrections?
I don't think it's too late, but this issue has not been closed about remembering or forgetting Joseph. That's kind of where we're at. God is continuing to bless those who bless His people. He is continuing to curse those who curse. That hasn't stopped. That hasn't ended. All of us, every church, every denomination, every nation needs to decide whether they will be a people that knows Joseph or forgets Joseph. Yes?
I heard a sermon last night on YouTube, Bill Randall's, and he was talking about how he feels like Rome is the feet of iron and Islam is the toes of clay that's coming to mix. And because Europe has been godless, they have allowed this immigration to happen to their country. And that a few years ago there were 70 children that were murdered by a gunman that came in on their camp.
Yeah, I remember that up in
He said
Norway,
the
wasn't it?
story had come out that these people were role-playing. All those children were Palestinians, and they were told that the IDF was going to come in and terrorize them. So the gunman came in with the fake actors, and they were just fodder for the taking. And Bill said, why did God allow? Because Europe had turned her back on God. So America now is dealing with the same postmodern crisis that Europe has been dealing with.
and there's still a growing movement of people who are rejecting, the Jewish people, rejecting Israel, wanting to divest, the boycott, divest, and sanction, all that other kind of stuff. We're still fighting that. Universities are doing that. Denominations are doing that. So I mean, we're in that kind of place where. But here's the good thing. God is moving among His people, helping us to remember Joseph more and more. We're a part of that time where that tide is, the struggle's still going on, but we are being a part of that generation that's helping us to remember more and more. He is moving His people to return to the ancient paths and actually identify with Joseph more and more. That's what we're beginning to see. But remembering, here's the thing, remembering Joseph, as many of you know, can be costly. Because for a world and a church that has forgotten Joseph, to see you identifying with Joseph or remembering Joseph, that's not always well liked or well received. And so you've got to be willing, like these ladies, these Hebrew midwives, in fearing God more than men, you've got to be willing to fear God more than men in order to remember Joseph and be a part of even saving them and saving the people of God.
So that would actually mean breaking man's laws.
Yes, that's part of it. The government, and this is where things go. The government and ruling authority may ask us one day to be a part of dealing shrewdly with the people of God and abusing or persecuting them. That happened in Germany. The government told their people to let us know where they are, to identify them, to encourage them to betray, all those things. So that's going to be coming. That happened in Spain, that happened in Germany. The question really is whether we will be a people that fear these authorities and what they can do, or are we going to be ones that fear the authority of God? Yes, McCann.
It's funny you should say that, because in Germany, I was just listening, their population was rapidly declining, which is why they wanted to do this whole immigration thing, thinking that they could manage these people.
Mhm.
And I heard a Palestinian Christian that was preaching on it. He said, the Muslim religion is 1 in 4 people on the earth right now.
Mm-hmm.
But isn't it ironic that the very ones, the Germans that said to, wanted to annihilate the Jewish people are themselves being outpopulated?
They are being outpopulated, and they're in Germany and other European countries. They're inviting more people who want to destroy the Jewish people as well. So they have a history of wanting to destroy the Jewish people on their own, and that's leading to destruction for their future. But they're bringing in people who also want that same goal, and so it's just going to happen all over again.
They'll destroy them too.
Yeah, and they're going to destroy everybody at that point. But
Well, the thing about it is everything seems to be falling in place for the setting up of the Antichrist.
yeah, a lot of things are moving in that direction.
And
Absolutely.
there's not much anything anybody can do except just pray that we'll be strong.
Except when those moments come, these midwives here, they defied those orders and saved lives.
Not only did they defy them, they lied.
They were willing to lie in order to save life, and God
So
blessed them.
can we actually say that if there is a situation and we have to actually lie or deceive
Mm-hmm.
in order to save life, that God's in favor of that?
I think
There's
so.
a Jewish law specifically about
Yeah, I
that.
know.
I mean, if somebody breaks into my house and is threatening my life and says, and my family is hiding in a closet, and they say, is anybody else here? I'm going to tell them no.
But you know how?
And I'm going to feel good about
But
that.
throughout the generations, if you lie, then you have part of the lake of fire and all that.
Right, right.
But there is an actual time in that situation, only in that situation, I think,
Mhm.
that God is okay with that because we're protecting lives.
We're protecting lives.
life, you can lie.
Yeah. So,
Can
but-
I say something?
yeah.
Vance Havner, on my posted Vance Havner quote, when he said, if you want to be popular, preach happiness.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to be hated, preach holiness.
Mm-hmm.
And we're living in a day and a time when happiness is the popular thing.
Yep.
And holiness is the hated thing.
Yep. That's very
And
true.
we're reaping the consequences of it. And I really believe that the reason that a lot of us Christians are suffering during this time is to break us away from the world and put our focus on the Lord.
We may be too comfortable in Egypt
That's right.
in a lot of ways. And so we're going to have to be made uncomfortable in order to be willing to leave it.
That's right.
And that's a hard thing to realize. But the fear of the Lord is what needs to be the start. Fear of the Lord leading to salvation of these boys. God may use us to be a part of saving lives. There are those recognized even in history as the righteous Gentiles. Most famously, who from Germany? Y'all remember? Schindler. They made the movie about him and such. But who they rescued the Jewish people during Hitler's persecution. And some got away with doing that. Some were able to do it and maintain their life or their identity. And some lost everything
Like Corey Ten Boom.
in doing it, in trying to save families, like you said, Corey Ten Boom and such. But some lost everything. But we have to realize that not everyone is going to get away with this kind of disobedience. These midwives and such, they kind of did. Not everybody's going to get away with it. There may be consequences because the world is going to condemn and punish those who are remembering Joseph. That's what the world wants to do. When you're defying their order, when you're defying their authority, they're going to come down on you. You have to know that's what's coming. But how does God respond? Verse 20, God was good to the midwives, and the people multiplied, growing very numerous. Because the midwives feared God, he gave them families of their own. That's one thing that Yeshua talked about. You may lose fathers, brothers, and sisters and all that, but what does he promise? you'll gain even more. You may lose things in this natural world, but you're going to gain far above and more than that in being faithful to Him. You know, that blessing, that recognition from God is what's most important. Does that mean that everything is going to be great and wonderful? No, it doesn't. In some ways, because of this divergence of people being willing to defy the orders, you know, it may even increase hostilities as their efforts get frustrated. Because what happens in verse 22? Pharaoh charged all his people, saying, "You are to cast every son that is born into the river, but let every daughter live." It got worse in some ways. You know, it wasn't just the midwives who were supposed to kill the boys. Now it's all of them are supposed to do it. And they're supposed to throw them into the Nile.
Now, one of the mysteries of the faith to me is in Hebrews 11th chapter, where it talks about those groups of people that were stoned and sawn asunder,
Right,
tainted and
Hebrews 11.
slain with the sword, wandering about in sheepskins and goatskins, being destitute, afflicted, and tormented. And I wonder if I would have enough faith to go through that.
It's easy to say from our comfort,
Yes.
but we have not been tested in that way. So yeah, we don't want to claim something that that we haven't had to endure.
You wonder, well, God had to be with them in a mighty way.
Absolutely. He gives us strength to endure. He gives us endurance to go through all of those things, and we realize what we're doing it for. But you know, we've seen it go in this account here in Exodus, from mistreatment and persecution to murder. You know, reports are already increasing and circulating about the rise of anti-Semitism in Europe and even in America and around the world, aren't we? We're seeing persecution and mistreatment. Cemeteries and synagogues are being vandalized. You see that in New York and Pittsburgh. A woman was just arrested in Cary, North Carolina. A woman. For the same kind of things. And we live in a world that is dividing. You know, it's not dividing really liberal, conservative, Democrat, or Republican, but it's those who are remembering Joseph and those versus those who are forgetting Joseph. That's really the divide that we are seeing. And those who are forgetting Joseph in our day are going to spiral further and further away from God. Aren't they? And they will make more and more bad decisions that have generational consequences. You know, I found this. I don't know if y'all can all see that back there, but it's a cartoon. It says, "Those who don't study history are doomed to repeat it," right? We heard that one earlier. Then it says, "Yet those who do study history are doomed to stand by helplessly while everyone else repeats it." Right? That's kind of where it's at. Those who are awakening, those who are remembering more and more of Joseph, are more than likely going to be in the minority. And they're going to see a greater and greater number of people getting further and further away from God. We're going to see that darkness increasing, but that's going to make our light shine even brighter. You know, because these people that are forgetting Joseph, that are making more and more bad decisions, that have this consequences off into the future, they're going to be finding themselves, as it was put in the book of Acts, that you may find themselves fighting against God. Right? And what kind of success will such people have if you fight against God?
Not much.
Ultimately, you're not going to be successful.
No.
You might have victory for a season. You may be in charge for a season, but it is not going to end well for you. These people are going to be fighting against God, and in spite of all of that, you know, that's as we see that we may be in the minority by remembering Joseph. We've got to remember and never lose sight of the fact that God is fully aware of what's going on. He's not absent or unaware. He is not unconcerned. He is not silent. He is not incapable. That's what the Exodus 3 promises. Then Adonai said, I have surely seen the affliction of my people who are in Egypt, and have heard their cry because of their slave masters, for I know their pain. So I have come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians, and to bring them up out of that land and into a good and large land, a land flowing with milk and honey, into the place of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. Now in verse 9 says, Now behold, the cry of Bnei Israel has come to me. Moreover, I have seen the oppression that the Egyptians have inflicted on them. Come now, I will send you to Pharaoh, so that you may bring my people, Bnei Israel, out from Egypt. So he sees the affliction. He hears the cries and prayers of his people. He knows the pain, and he will come down to deliver. He will bring them to their inheritance. He has sent a deliverer. He did that for them in their day with Moses, and he sent a deliverer in the person of the Messiah. But that also means he's going to be sent again, isn't he? Yeshua HaMashiach, who has delivered us from the kingdom of darkness and into the kingdom of the Son. Yeshua, who has saved us from sin and death. Yeshua, who has brought the mixed multitude of those who have faith in him. He has adopted us into God's household and given us an inheritance that can never perish, spoil, or fade. Yeshua, who is coming again to sit on the throne. Where is he sitting in?
Jerusalem.
It's in Jerusalem. See, we've got to keep our eyes fixed, no matter what's going on. We've got to keep our eyes fixed on Yeshua, the author and perfecter of our faith. We talked about this last week. We've got to keep that mission in mind in making disciples, teaching them to obey everything that he has commanded, because that's part of remembering Joseph. Remembering Joseph and the call to fear God more than men, and striving toward that mystery of God being completed, where Jew and Gentile are one in Messiah, where the outside world can't tell the difference between a Gentile believer in Messiah and a Jewish believer in Messiah, where we will be treated as Joseph, as all of the children of Israel. That's the goal. That's where we're going.
And the only way we can get to that goal is to love God with all of our heart, soul, mind, and strength,
Mhm.
to love our neighbor as ourselves.
Mm-hmm. And that
Keep
is
our
that
eyes
is the
on
heart of it,
Jesus.
keeping our eyes on him. But there are so many people who would say those same things, that say they love God with all their heart, soul, mind, and strength, that love their neighbor as themselves, but they are still forgetting Joseph. That's part of our call as his people, is we need to show what it means to remember Joseph, and to remember that kind of life and what it truly is supposed to be. That's our calling, that's our intention.
Now, to remember Joseph, put it to me in points.
Make it plain, make it
To
plain.
remember Joseph.
Well, number one, I think, is just to remember, to remember Joseph is to identify, realize that we are with them,
With who?
with the Jewish people. We are engrafted into that branch. We are not a separate people. We might be living out of the land of Goshen, as was talked about earlier, and blending in a little too much. But we've got to remember that our identity is with them.
We need
Like the
to,
midwives. We've got
Like
to
the
be
midwives.
we need
Yeah.
to remember our past so that we don't forget what God has given us.
That the walk in the way of life that he is not done away with. That's remembering Joseph. We have to remember that that's all a part of it, and that's what God is awakening in us. Yes.